Come this summer, getting around in Midland using public transit could get a lot easier and faster. This month, Council approved a new on-demand microtransit service, and it's expected to increase transit coverage by a whopping 150%. But how are they going to do it? Well, Mayor Bill Gordon joins me now to explain. Good morning.
Good morning, Ramesh.
Okay, so before we get into the expansion, let's talk about how public transit works in Midland right now. What does that look like?
Sure. So it's traditional large buses like you'd see in much larger municipalities. And we've had those since the 50s. And they drive a fixed route. And people stop at bus stops or hail the bus if they are in between stops, get on and tap their card or pay with cash and, ride the route until they're ready to pull the cord and get off.
Okay. And you've done studies on the transit routes. What are some of the service gaps that have been identified?
Well, I think the biggest gap is that it's a financial gap, which exists in every transit model, but the bus manufacturer that we in many municipalities use has become insolvent. So parts for those buses and the reliability is really a challenge, and the replacement for those large buses is $1 million each, which, in our world is like a 4% tax increase just for one bus. So that's the financial gap. The other gap is that, if you don't live near a fixed route, you need to somehow travel from your home to the fixed route in order to access public transit. So that kind of got us thinking about microtransit as an option. Many municipalities have adopted it, so we're not leading the pack here.
Right.
But that's basically you hail it, much like an Uber, either an app or a telephone call to the dispatch. It comes and collects you and brings you to your destination. But that seemed like a bit too much of a change for some of our ridership, especially our elderly folks who've really, used the bus as a social, mechanism aside from getting around. So we talked to the vendor. It was part of the RFP process, and it looks like we can keep the fixed route, albeit with smaller vehicles now, not those big buses, and offer that on-demand, which is near door-to-door type delivery for the heavily subsidized low rate of $3.75 for an adult and down to $1.75 for seniors.
And what is this going to do for the municipality? How is this going to change things?
Well, I think the big change is that it makes public transit accessible to every address in the community. So for those that maybe wouldn't traditionally take public transit because they were nowhere near our route, they now have access to this system that arguably they're paying for their taxes anyway. So we're hoping to offer, rides and ride availability to factory shift workers and people that would, maybe that need to get their kids to school and don't want to be the parents lined up along the road twice a day. And just offer transit to more than just the demographic that we're serving now to make it more equitable for our community. Because again, they're all paying for it.
So what kind of vehicles are we talking about? You said it's not going to be the large buses that people are used to. So what are we going to see on the roads?
Well, what's being pitched initially were these 11-passenger minivans. And they're the kind of thing you'd get into if you go to a resort. You go to the airport, you get on these things, they load your luggage and a bunch of other passengers into and hustle you off to your resort in Mexico or what have you. However, there are many options. There's some electric ones that are a bit larger and a bit more boxy and more traditional. And of course, there's smaller ones that are more akin to a minivan, but those were deemed unsuitable for our community. So I think we're going to land somewhere in that 11 to 20 passenger vehicle with a mix of vehicle types because they need to be accessible. Although we're not getting out of our contract with Community Reach that we've had for 20 years that delivers pure accessible transit. But for the people that need quasi-accessible needs, walkers and a bit more time to board or can't quite make the steps of a traditional bus, we need to factor that into which vehicles we purchase. And of course, we're doing this with our neighbouring community, Penetanguishene. We partner 2 municipalities to provide transit to both of our services, or both of our municipalities.
What is this going to mean for the drivers of the existing buses?
Well, if they choose to transition, and they'll have first right of refusal with a new company, that was also part of our RFP because we really want to look after our staff. If they choose to transition, then it means they no longer need a Class B license to drive the big air brake buses. That goes down to Class G. That's the kind of license that we all have to operate just about any normal motor vehicle. And so it's less onus and less onerous for them. They don't have to have, the physical checks that go with Class B licenses and, the skills to drive a large bus. So I think it opens up the job pool to more people that may be interested in driving for us. But everybody that is working for us now that wants to continue that employment will be able to do so with the new vendor that we've chosen, which is Ride with Via.
Now, with this on-demand service, that you're hoping to implement, what is that going to mean for taxi services in the community?
Well, that's a good question because taxis are not publicly subsidized as our buses are. So, your typical taxi ride around town can be anywhere between $10 to $16 and a lot more if you're leaving town, which of course our public transit doesn't leave town other than between Midland and Penetanguishene. So we used to be in the regulation industry. We would regulate taxi services. So in advance of this, we decided to get out of that business and leave the taxi service to the, capitalism and the free markets and let them work in their own regulated, self-regulated space, make sure they hire drivers that, pass criminal record checks and that are in good standing with their abstracts. We just got out of that business because it didn't make sense to be effectively a competitor with them as we get into this more like a door-to-door experience for transit. We weren't really competing with them, pardon me, as a fixed route operator. But now that we're getting into microtransit, the parallels are, just too obvious to ignore.
So what is going to happen for the oversight of taxi services and people who do still need to take that?
So several months ago when we discontinued this, the oversight is now self-regulated, just like any other industry. They pay a lot of insurance to operate a taxi business, and those insurance providers make sure that drivers are qualified. And if they aren't, then the organization that employs them faces some significant jeopardy if they don't drive properly or they misbehave while operating. So we looked at other municipalities that don't regulate taxis, and the world didn't end. And the taxi companies here are very responsible, and they know the onus is on them, and arguably always has been, to make sure they're good, safe operators.
You mentioned that the vehicle sizes are going to be changing. Is that going to cause any concern for capacity? And if people want to take this, especially if you're expanding services and more people might be interested in this?
I hope that's a problem. And arguably, that's the best part of microtransit is the ability to surge and to respond to the data that we get from ridership and ride hails much quicker than we could with a traditional route. So if we see that the usage is increasing, which truly is our hope, then that just means we acquire some more buses or more of these minivan type things or whatever the form factor is. And we just add more money into the pool of hours that we pay the vendor to operate the transit service for us.
While I have you on the line, I just want to check on one more thing. It is pothole season.
Oh, God.
And I was reading that you guys are using AI in that. What's happening there?
Yeah, so who isn't using AI now? I was just listening to your piece earlier on, the way it's being used in marketing. But What we're using it for is to stay compliant with the provincial, it's called a minimum maintenance standards. I know I take some beating online about that, just the minimums. But the reality is these are requirements set by the province for road conditions, road widths, and, everything from everything to do with the road conditions and roads. So the minimum maintenance standards requires something called a PCI. So MMS is one acronym and PCI is another 3-letter acronym. Every agency and organization is plagued with them. I'm sure CBC has lots of TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. So the minimum maintenance standard requires this pavement condition index. So when our roads operators drive around to their vehicles, they're manually looking with their eyes, making sure they don't drive off the road, they don't hit anybody. They're also trying to scan the road for any defects. They're doing all this the human way. It's the way it's always been done. Well, the new version that we're trying out is a camera, effectively a dash cam, that's connected to some machine learning in the back end that will be a second set of eyes for the operator. So it's scanning the road ahead. It's using artificial intelligence to make determinations about the road condition, things like sign reflectivity, because that's another legal standard we have to have, is certain signs need to reflect, regulatory signs. Or even it'll discover missing signs. Once we upload all of the sign inventory, the regulatory signs we have, as the roads supervisor drives around, if there's a sign that's missing, and signs do go missing, it will flag that, and a human would easily miss that because they're busy trying to operate the motor vehicle. So this combination of surveillance technology tied into machine learning, tied into the reporting that it does in the back end, allows us to be more efficient, categorize and map where the defects are located, where they're likely to form, and get to them sooner and do things on a priority basis. So it's really about efficiency.
Fascinating. I want to, before I let you go, when is this new microtransit piece that we were just talking about? When is that going to be implemented?
We're saying summer.
Okay.
We don't want to paint ourselves into the corner. I'd love to see it live for Canada Day, July 1st, and offer free rides to everybody down to Little Lake Park to enjoy the festivities. Staff know that, but I'm not forcing them into that. So because this is a team effort between Midland and Penetanguishene, both of our teams need to be ready to go on the same date. So we're saying summer launch, but we also need time to educate the consumers and our users. And there'll be public centers, public information centers where they can learn how the system is different and how to use it and to get in the vehicles. And, we don't want to rush that process. So summertime is the objective.
Okay, Mayor Gordon, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.